So welcome back to Women of Water Get Real Virtual Summit. We're talking about where women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how to stop those leaks, and how to bring women back. This is that fifth element in the career pipeline or pathway. And some people are talking about making it a little less non-linear. But in order to do that, we have to look at not just attraction and education and initial recruitment and onboarding and retention and development and then up to advancement and leadership, but also this fifth element, which is re-entry. If women, as so often happens, step out of the workforce, whether it's something that happened at work or something happening at home or their personal health, and then they want to get back in, we're not seeing those pathways, but there are some amazing people who are working on that. And Jen Scott is one of the folks that is leading the charge. Jen is here from Society for Women Engineers. She's the co-chair and co-founder of the career, the STEM career reentry task force. Jen, tell us more about and welcome. Thank you for being here.
Thank you for the opportunity. I love to talk about one of my passion projects, and the STEM Reentry Task Force is definitely one of them. I am currently the Executive Vice President of Partnerships and Events at SWE, the Society of Women Engineers. And in that role, I work with many employers across industries and across the globe. And as mentioned, one of my passion projects is the STEM Reentry Task Force, which I am the co-founder and co-director of. And I am always going to say women because I work with SWE, and we're going to talk about bringing women back to the workforce, but not in just any role, right? In a very engineering and technology forward-facing role, and how to help, you know, I don't want to say fill the leaky pipeline, because how could you fill it if it keeps on leaking, but help maybe circumvent some of the issues of women advancing in their careers and staying in engineering and technology, which is super important in this day and age.
Yeah. And, I haven't really brought up, and in some of the other interviews I've shared some of my own experiences working with a big firm and being actually finding out after I started there that one of the reasons I was hired and recruited pretty heavily was because the head of water resources wanted to prove that a woman could become an associate in the water engineering division. I'd be the first one globally. At the time I was like, yes, bring it on, I am a woman, here we go. And you really didn't know what I was in for, and working my way up and eventually transferring to office. It was really quite hostile towards women, and especially my junior women were they brought me into at that middle level that I was level 4, so that I could manage all the level 1, 2s, and 3s, because all the men had been promoted up or stolen by the clients. And I've never really haven't really asked about, like, how to actually address that, say, in job interviews. I don't want to just lie. I don't want to come up, I think a lot of women sort of use a convenient excuse, like want to spend more time with my family, or it's kind of like when when politicians get a really bad poll result and they get up and they have a press conference and, suddenly I've decided I want to spend more time with my family. I mean, not always. Yes, obviously there's a lot of women that do, but that isn't always the case, or may not be the only reason if there is, a situation in the office. And how not to get labeled, how not to get blackballed, how to make sure that you can actually get back in. Some of these return to work programs do sort of emphasize that, oh, it's only for women who did caretaking, right?
Yeah, and I would say that's really not the case. So we find folks who have left for a variety of reasons, right? So the most common and the one that folks gravitate to is, right, they left because they had children, they wanted to spend more time at home with their children. Maybe the next is elder care or health care issues, right? So they had to step away. Sometimes it's the perfect excuse to leave a bad work environment and a bad work culture on a quote unquote positive note, if you would, right? Oh, no, it's not you, it's me. I'm leaving because of my family. But really, if the culture at the office, or their peers were more inclusive and welcoming, not only to themselves, but other colleagues, it could be male colleagues too, who have to leave for private family event or something very personal that they don't want to share. And all those eyes judging you when you do and take those breaks during the day or have to leave at 5, and oh my goodness, God forbid you leave at 5. And so we are finding that it's been sometimes a nice excuse that folks say, oh no, I'm leaving because of family reasons, but really it's all things combining, right? They do have additional tasks at home, but also the culture is so not great. They don't want to stay. They don't want to try and make it work because it's not a supportive culture.
Yeah. And have been changing. I mean, the millennials have certainly been pushing a lot of change, and for both men and women to have parental leave, with a new child or adoption, to have more flexibility around taking care of kids, and also obviously COVID really made a lot of changes in terms of work from home, and
Yeah.
especially in the water industry, can be very conservative in terms of not wanting to change that, and you have to be part of the team, and you have to be in the office. I think some of the consulting, you were often on the road anyway, so it's your home away from home, in computer or in hotel rooms.
Yes. Yeah.
So maybe managing teams remotely anyway, but how much of that is continuing to make it possible, so that it may be more possible for women who didn't have an option before, but they might have an option now because there is the flexibility, or their kids are older and they're
Yeah.
ready to come back in, how to make sure that they're not permanently mommy tracked or discarded by the industry because they haven't been able to keep up their tech skills, or their memberships in professional associations and their licenses. It's very expensive stuff if you don't have your employer paying for it.
I would totally agree. I mean, I think COVID did escalate the need for more reentry type programs. Like people are like, oh, wow, this is a thing. You brought up some really interesting points. And I was thinking of the water industry and specifically because ironically, I was having a conversation just last week about a firm looking for a specific type of talent. And it's a talent that would not be entry level. It's someone who worked in the industry for years and was able to work on certain structures. And so they have that knowledge to bring back to the workforce, which is what's needed in some of these upgrades, some structural upgrades you're seeing in different cities across the US and probably across the globe, really. So it's very interesting to see. And I always say once an engineer, always an engineer, right? The math itself doesn't change. Some new tech does change, right? How we interface and even the common Zoom call now, whereas years ago wasn't so common necessarily. So, ironically, we're seeing a lot of folks who are ready to come back to work, from whatever type of breaks we've seen. 2 years is what we consider the standard in the reentry space. Although with COVID, everyone's like 1 year. And I'm like, no, still 2 years. And we've seen folks come back successfully with 24 years away from industry. And so we're seeing folks who are updating their skills, taking those credentialing classes. They might not have their licensures up to date, right? That is a common thing. I would say one of our challenges, a lot of times I work with a lot of government agencies and non-government agencies, but might need their security clearance. And they're like, oh, well, we want to have a return to work program, but we want everyone to already have their security clearance. And I'm like, well, if they're returning to work, chances are their security clearance has expired, and you will need to invest in, getting them back up to speed and back with that whatever clearance level they need. So it is some of those certifications, as you were saying, and specific things that folks need, those are missing and they will need to be invested in. But overall, we're seeing qualified candidates, right? Those that know their engineering in and out. And now that they've taken their break for whatever reason, might even have more people experience, is what we like to say, right? Managing different projects, managing a household, making sure everyone's getting to where they need to be on time. I mean, that is a lot of management skills that you don't necessarily get when you enter the workforce in a technical career.
Yeah. Yep. Yep. And you mentioned something very interesting in terms of your work with government agencies. And one thing that has, that I've heard from, as I've tried to get back into the work for, I've had Water Citizen for over 10 years as a nonprofit. It was meeting a need in the industry for us to find ways to use internet-based programs better, seeing those opportunities 10 years ago. Nobody wanted to go online until COVID. We did some great work during COVID as well. And continuing to do things like this summit. But this is something that I can hand off to someone that if there's an opportunity for me to actually use my PhD in engineering again, worked really hard for that and really wanted to have that opportunity to do water planning and water management and decision support systems and smart water systems. And and that becoming a professional requires mentorship. It's not just, I think a lot of the private sector, it's like, okay, once an accountant, always an accountant. Once a marketing person, yeah, there's some changes, but you can kind of get in and just, pick up where you left off. And as a professional, you need to build up your project experience and do it under, someone who's been there for a while. And is there that openness to mentoring someone who has perhaps been out of the market for a while and may even be older than the mentor?
Yeah, no, absolutely. So what we're seeing in the task force with our employer partners, many of them are setting up. My old colleague used to call it a buddy system. I'm not a fan of the word buddy. I don't know why, but she was like, you would have a technical buddy and also then kind of more a personal buddy, right? So someone who could help you maybe find the bathroom is a more of a personal buddy, and then a technical buddy slash mentor. And that person could be younger than them. In many cases, now we're seeing that that is the case, right? That younger folks are mentoring up with the current technology, whether it's Zoom or even, let's just say, Google Calendars, or, how to, I'm just trying to even grasp at what's new anymore because I've been online for so long with COVID now.
Right.
It's a thing. But we're seeing a lot of younger folks, right? 2-3 years experience mentoring some of the returning professionals that might be their manager one day, on how to use the new technology. And then what we also talk about with employers too is you're upskilling your current workforce. Why wouldn't you upskill this other piece, right? There might be specific learning curves in that might slow down their learning. However, you're upskilling anyway. So just apply it to this new group of folks coming back to the workforce. We need all hands on deck, right? We need a lot of employees nowadays in these careers.
Yeah. And especially when we're in water, environmental, water related fields, so much of the work is either for a public agency, regulated by a public agency, or a contractor, consultant or vendor to a public agency. And so they have the same hiring systems, they have the same ranking systems, and it's so many years of experience, and you're going to be, this is a 6-10 year position, and yet if somebody has been out of school over a longer period of time, but not continuously working that whole time, and or working, part-time, or volunteering their time or what have you. It's not the same experience. I mean, I've been working with Water Citizen pretty much full time, but it just doesn't pay like a regular organization. Um and I don't have access to, say, very expensive programs that a consulting firm would have. Right. So there's no way for me to keep up, GIS or something. They don't have the home version of GIS, and I wouldn't be able to, I wouldn't have anything to be able to do it with if I, even if I had it. So, but at the same time, what we're doing here is very technical, taking all these interviews and essentially programming this Hey Summit platform, and so that there's a clear storyline, and that the interviews are going to are dripping out at specific times. So people go to a specific page, they see a specific, they can see your bio, they can see that information. That takes some programming, that takes some decisions around how do we this is basically qualitative data here.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely.
Yeah. So when we have these government positions and government contractors, so often I've heard from some of the organizations that have been created. We heard from iRelaunch. We're talking to Untapped Potential. I've talked to Path Forward before. That work with organizations to develop their programs, and it's really typically private sector, right? And even
Yeah.
when it's even engineering, it's manufacturing engineering or computer engineering, and not civil work, right? And so how is that changing? What are you doing with I heard about something happening in Utah. I mean, what have you been able to do in terms of actually getting government agencies, government contractors, to see how they can incorporate people returning to work within the constraints of federal and government contractor hiring practices?
Yeah, I mean, so we do work, a couple of our employer partners that have joined the STEM Reentry Task Force, definitely are government contractors. Someone might be a government agency per se, and some are definitely adjacent. And sometimes, I mean, those are the tricky ones, right? They are tricky for a variety of reasons. One, needing the certifications and the degrees and the security clearances and the check the box. And if they're a consulting agency, right, there's even more. They can only bill their hours. So then how are they building kind of this onboarding and training of this person or these folks, into that talent pool where they can only allocate so many hours to education. So it is very interesting and nuanced on the side of the employers we're currently working with. Now, that being said, there's been progress made. And I say we, but SWE's tried really hard to make kind of reentry a bigger issue on the Hill in DC, more of a national landscape, where these government agencies can look for this hidden talent that's not it's necessarily so hidden, but there's a lot of roadblocks in the way. And success has been made on the state level, in particular that you mentioned. And now there's the Restart Act has been reintroduced to the floor. So hopefully that will gain momentum. And the goal there with that act and others, I think there's a small line in the CHIPS bill, if you will. But we're working very hard. We have briefings on the Hill all the time for staffers to try and talk about how reentry is so powerful, and even in the government space, how both local, state, and national government can hire folks that have this break. And so we're seeing more and more briefings. I'm feeling more positive, again, with the Restarts Act being restarted, and the conversations continuing along this path, because it's a huge waste to let these folks go. And then also to even take a step back to something you mentioned earlier on, I know pre-COVID, when I used to speak on the STEM reentry task force or re-entering the workforce and what that looked like, I always assumed that my audience would be employers. Like employers want to know how to bring folks back to work and how to re-engage with this talent pool. Of course, looking at women, there's a lot of gender parity questions out there and folks want answers. But I would say those handful of workshops that I led and panels that I led before pre-COVID, the majority of the audience were young university students, some just graduating, some thinking about planning for their future. Where will they be allowed to take a break and hopefully come back, right? So a lot of the employers we work with, the main feeder pool into these programs are their regrettable losses, right? Folks who have left the organization for one reason or another and couldn't find a way back. And now there's a way back. And so we're seeing younger folks really look at companies. I'm going to say companies, it could be public sector employers as well. What is their position on their hiring practices? Do they have innovative programming? I used to always say I've been at SWE for 14 years, and one of the things that was very attractive to SWE members was sustainability, right? Which of course all water plays a role in that. And now I'm also seeing, how are employees being treated? Are they being welcomed back? Are they allowed to step away and come back? So it's very interesting how the conversation continues through that sustainability lens, but also now, what is the workplace culture? And is it a welcoming environment to bring folks back? And even in government, what does that look like?
Yeah. And I know that there are some of these returnship programs that have tended to look for their own alumni, the people that had worked for them previously. Might be a little harder for someone who hasn't worked there before. But the only environmental consulting firm that I know of that has a program like this is CDM Smith, that had 600 applications for 6 spots this year.
Yeah.
I mean, their first year they had 2 spots. Yeah,
Yes.
that is, they're trying to place them, kind of like a 6-week or a 12-week, essentially like an internship, no obligation on either sides. It's got to be something well bounded as far as what the person's working on, and many of them do end up getting an offer at the end. But yeah, so. Clearly with 600 applications, there is a demand for this. And so if other environmental consulting firms and other, and water technology firms, and there are those who want to come back. They are ready to come back. They're ready to go through whatever the hoops are and to do it in in that kind of temporary environment first, and it has some advantages in both ways, right?
Yes, exactly. It's safe for the employer, it's safe for the employee. They both have an opportunity to see one, it was such a new concept 8 years ago when we started the STEM Reentry Task Force to now. Now it seems like more folks are familiar with the concept, but it really gives managers, I find those middle managers are the ones that struggle the most, the frontline managers, because they feel like it might be an extra burden to take on someone who's been out of work for whatever reason, right? And bring them back up to speed. And so that's why these kind of returnship programs, usually they're about 3 months long, like you said, 12 weeks, and they have an overlaying program on top of the actual day-to-day activities. And it's a safe place for both the company or employer to see, will this person work out? Almost no harm, no foul. And the returner seeing, okay, am I ready to go back? 1. And 2, is this
the place for me?
Yeah, is this the place for me? And I think when you use the CDM Smith, model, it's interesting, right? Because if more organizations that were in water, were in sustainability, were in these these fields that do see a lot of women, if they were to implement these programs, man, they would see huge amounts of folks wanting to join that
Right.
space, you know.
And really, I think easier to integrate than some of the kids just out of school. We had, there's so much emphasis on next generation, new graduates, um, of having been, having kept timesheets and having been conscious of billable hours and having, or how government contracting works, or, whatever, that that part doesn't change so much. It might be a
No.
different program management software. People might invent, come up with words like agile and waterfall and this, that, and the other thing. But still, it's you know, let's get things done, and that's what engineers do, right? We get things done. How do we get things
Absolutely.
done? And
Absolutely.
yeah, yeah. So,
And you hit
and
it on the
doing
head
whatever it
too, right
takes to do
there
that.
with um having again been in this space for so many years and working with many government organizations, yeah, those contracts and that paperwork is still very much the same. So, folks coming back who's used to working within those parameters, know which ones they could push the boundaries on, and the ones that you have to stay within the lines. Those are important folks to have on the team. They know the ins and outs.
Right, 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 right. Yeah, yeah. Well, hopefully more people are gonna think that. Um, any other? By the way, I did want to mention before I forget. Uh, something else that SWE has been working on right now is we are still in the 50th anniversary of Title IX. One of the things that we had reached out to SWE for, and I'll just share my screen so you can see. Where is it? Here we go. Is okay. This is the timeline at 50. Timeline at 50. Okay, yeah. So there was a whole study on Title IX at 50, and so for those of you who missed this part, so Title IX being the law that says, well, do you want to explain Title IX? You might explain it better than I do.
I probably can't explain it better than you can. But right, Title
Yeah,
IX. Okay, go ahead.
yeah. That legislation from 1972 that if an educational institution is getting federal money, they can't discriminate on the basis of sex, and that actually allowed women. It was before that it was possible to be prohibited from studying engineering, or for there to be quotas that you could only have 7 women in a class of 700 or whatever. And in science and to work in the labs and all the rest. So it's girls and women advanced in a variety of educational spheres, and a lot of people associate it with sports because that is typically segregated by gender. So you have to have if you got a men's football team, you have to have a women's rugby team or something like that, something kind of equivalent. But there's a lot more to it, and some of the issues you can see. There's little issue sheets on here. Things like sexual harassment. I mean, it's not just are we getting the percents, are we getting the numbers of women in these fields? And I know for women, one of the International Women and Girls in Science or STEM or whatever days, they're like, hey, we're almost at 50-50. And, but does that include nursing? Does that include, science education? And then are those women really thriving in these majors? Are they experiencing sexual harassment? Different disciplines based on sex and race, LGBTQ, pregnant and parenting students. That's an issue. The legislation that's been proposed in Florida banning all gender and race specific programs. It's not just about CBT, but critical race theory. It's also gender programs, and has that impact? I mean, is that impacting SWE, or are there SWE chapters that are being threatened around the country? I don't know. Have you guys heard anything about that?
Yeah, right. So right now we're not getting much feedback, right, on the impact to local sections around the country with Title IX. It is important to note, right, like you said, it started in sports. And SWE has definitely been one of the advocates among many others who are like, okay, all phases of education, like this has to include everything on at a university, and really the university needs to be held accountable for their actions, which I believe that's been a little bit gray as well when we're talking about Title IX, like who's holding folks accountable to their actions. But it has been very important when you talk about the lab hours, when the lab, and that is also then based on student safety within the university, right? Who has access to the lab at what time? You know, folks who identify as male have more access because they're allowed to walk more freely around campus. They're allowed to keep those overnight hours and do that work in the lab, where women students are faced with backlash and criticism. Well, you're putting yourself at risk by staying at the lab too late, or what are you doing here? And this is, you know, coming from their professors, their advisors. I mean, you have a PhD, right? You had
Rumors getting spread that, oh,
correct.
you spent the night
Oh,
there, and oh, walk of shame, you know?
yeah, yeah, and that is it is I hate to say that it's still a thing. When I
Right,
started at SWE 14 years ago, I thought, man, we're gonna change the world. Like we are gonna,
right.
it's just gonna be like magic. Um, and some days it does feel like Groundhog Day, right? Where you're starting over, but it's super important to start over. And one of the things that um I want to highlight, although, you know, I didn't bring anything with me here, but SWE has an archive since our founding over 70 years ago. So we have archives. We have pulled letters from the archive, and there have been partners that have used some of these letters in their commercials where it shows um, what women were going through just to get an engineering degree. And
Right.
what's so disturbing is that some of them resonate today,
Yeah.
right?
Right. I mean, I've had times where, you know, I showed up for a fellowship and the department secretary forgot to turn in the paperwork. And, you know, suddenly I'm scrambling to try to figure out how to support myself, and could have had an associate or assistantship available. Um, but then the department refused to let me, you know, add enough classes to go back full time because I dropped back to part time. I had written a proposal, had been hired to help write a large proposal that didn't win, you know, multiple departments, and I kind of saw a piece of that was something I was interested in, wrote a little proposal and got, you know, a little $20,000 grant. Yeah, and I put somebody down as the PI because I had to. That was required. The professor had to be the PI, and when you know, it kind of, you know, I sat in a little desk in his big office, you know, kind of a you know, on-site consulting practice. So some of these professors have, and they'll get these grad students, usually a lot of foreign students who can't leave because they're on a student visa, and women
Yeah.
to do all the work, and are able to undercut, you know, consulting firms because um you know, they can charge less because they're not paying, you know, all, you know, they're paying student assistantship rates. And
Mm-hmm.
but I had my own
Yeah.
little thing, and when I got that renewed by the Water Institute, you know, the guy came over and said, you have to give a presentation and tell people what you're working on, and I did. And the next week he shows up, he says, you know, you don't have any money left, you have to leave. And he took the money and put it into another project, and there's
Oh
nothing I
yeah.
could do. Absolutely
Yeah.
nothing I could do. Yeah.
We
I've had
see that all
people.
the time. I mean, I wish we didn't in this day and
Right.
age, but we do. We
Yeah.
see it all the time, in a variety of, you know, you mentioned the PI roles, right? And a lot of the organizations are looking for diversity in the PI roles, but due to certain limitations or status, You know, you go back to the standard, oh, well, this person has received many awards, and so we're going to make him the PI, but we'll subcontract, but you'll be the actual, you know, person getting the money. But then some,
Right.
as you just said, right, they can shift those funds as they want. They're the PI.
Right. Or write the proposal and then somebody decides, for somebody else to be the prime because I'm not in the right position. It has to go to a university or a nonprofit or to, somebody with residency in a certain state or country or whatever. And lots of promises. Oh yeah, we'll split it with you 50-50 if you write the proposal and I win the money. And they go, oh, well, we changed our mind. And you can't. And we got the women-owned small business program. We're going to actually talk to Ann Sullivan from Women Impacting Public Policy. Has done a lot of that, and it's like, what kind of recourse do you have if you don't get the money? If you don't get what's you can't sue. I mean, the reputational damage if you sue is bad enough, but just having the capacity to have take on someone who's got an entire legal counsel department,
Very true. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. So so those are some things that are coming up on the Title IX side, at the front end of the spectrum. And then just, continuing to see some of these things throughout career, and it may be that people step back, but things have been changing. There are more women in the industry, and so it can be a good time for women to come back, especially with this administration really pushing for diversity. And we've seen some agencies that, the head of the agency is told, you have to have diverse hires. So they're looking for people to hire, and they're getting young folks because those are the ones that are still working. Kids are just out of school, taking on things like the National Natural Assessment. This is that we were working on. Someday we should do something like this. This is what we were talking about in grad school, and now they're actually doing it. But the people who were, the pioneers in this can't get back in because it's so hard to do the federal programs.
Yeah.
And
It
it's not
is
like
really
they haven't
hard, and
done
I
it.
hope we change that landscape, kind of one employer and opportunity at a time, one state at a time, maybe that's what it's going to take, state by state, to ratify some returnships, and count for that head count, right? You're going to hold true and hold, even if it's 5 people, let's just say 5. I mean, hold true and hold those 5 positions for someone who has had work experience and then stepped away for one reason or another. Could be anything. I don't even care what it is, right? But that now let's hold these positions for folks coming back to work, and that adds value. It adds value to the team. It adds value to the organization, to any project they're assigned. I mean, life lessons. Think of how much we've all learned. I mean, I am way smarter than I was when I graduated college. I mean, and I'm sure when I graduated, I thought I knew it all, right? Back at the day. But now I'm like, wow, I know way more. I know how to navigate this situation. I know how to read the room. I know how to organize folks to be successful. Well, who wouldn't want to take advantage of that, right? But because of the rules and regulations of like the past, right? Everyone has to show their CV with every year filled with something. And our hope is that
there must have been a problem. There must have been a reason they left.
Right.
Or,
Oh yeah.
If they're an entrepreneur that, which is what some people turn to just to keep going. Well, they must be not a team player. They don't play well with others.
What's the reason? Yeah, no, for sure. Even recently I was on an interview panel, and somebody was questioning why XYZ, and I'm like, no, I don't care. Like, let's focus on the here and now and what's important now, and what will then, if they join, right, why would they stay? Like, that's the important piece. Like, I don't want to look at the filling in of the blanks. Oh, they, and if someone went off to be entrepreneurial, all the better. All the better. I want them to bring that entrepreneurial spirit back to work, right? Like, let's do that and not be so stringent. But it's hard to change the old government, the old engineering
Right.
systems. COVID was a big push in the right direction. We'll see what
Yeah.
happens.
Well, and even some other avenues for people just starting in a career like volunteering is often not a possibility in public sector. And
Mhm.
for someone out of school, and there's been so much push to pay your interns, which isn't really an option if you're a small organization. But if you're trying to get some experience, they don't take interns who, even unpaid interns to be
Oh
able to
yeah.
say, hey, I will show up. I will, you got something that nobody's doing, let me have at it, and show what I can do and make a contribution. That's what, we're here in Washington, D.C. That's what, this place is all about is making some kind of contribution, making some kind of a difference in the world, right?
Yeah, I totally agree. And I find it disturbing, right, that folks can't take on interns paid or unpaid. Sometimes there's rules around that, especially in government, right? There's all
Yeah.
the rules and regulations, and that's too bad because who's losing out? We all are. We're all losing out.
Right. Right, right. As so many of the agencies with, all the new infrastructure money, having all these webinars, we're hiring, and was one for FEMA, for Department of Energy, and you can hear the women's voices who are asking questions. It sounds like older voices.
Yeah.
And then go through all these hoops, and then you get an email that says, thank you very much for applying to be this climate core. Now go look at USA Jobs to find a position. It's like, that's fun. But and EPA has ORISE. I mean, there's a model already. I can't tell you how many times I have seen a listing in Indeed from EPA that just sounds so perfect. And all these multidisciplinary and try to figure out how we can do equity better or how we can develop this policy better or whatever. And I read all the way down to the bottom and say, oh, and this is under ORISE, and you have to be a student or graduated within 5 years. So
Yeah.
but there's a model already. There are existing models. This is not something that hasn't been done before. We've got, the presidential fellowship programs. We've got lots of programs to place someone into an organization for a short period of time. Why can't it be this as well, and not just for new graduates?
Yeah, no, totally agree. And that is like kind of our language that we use all the time. You're doing this for new hires. You're doing this for recent grads, whether it's undergrad or PhD or in between, right? Can't you do this for professionals? Like why?
No reason whatsoever. Well, let me know if you need help. Somehow I know this routine. So, yeah. I mean, we can. I think hopefully there's a will for this. And are there any specific, not that we're lobbying or anything, we're just informing if there's any specific, uh, members that are taking a lead on this, or bills that you mentioned, a couple of the bills that are, what's happening there?
Yeah, I mean, so we're definitely keeping a close eye on the Restarts Act that I mentioned.
Which is
So
what?
definitely so I knew you were going to ask me that. And now I got to look it up. That's what happened. But that's one of the primary vehicles right now that is front and center in Congress. So one, it addresses some of the issues that arose during COVID, but with paychecks and all of that. But two, it's really to introduce legislation that allows not only the national government, but smaller governments to create the space to hire folks that have been out of work and into government positions. So, or subsidize small businesses. So, right, so some of the large multinational companies, right, employers, it's a lot easier for them to absorb costs of skilling or upskilling or retooling. Some is needed, some is not needed, if you would. But the Restarts Act does include some monies that small businesses could apply for if they're going to bring people back to work. In a nutshell.
As
So I think
opposed to in COVID, it was about money to not lay off people. This is money in advance for you to hire people.
right, to hire people. Yeah. That's what at least that's the intent behind it at this point. Um right. Yeah, that's what I would say. Instead of,
And there's
not
language,
laying off,
yeah,
right? To
right.
hire.
And there's language around returnships embedded in the Restart Act.
There is language specifically around returnships in the Restart Act. So we're hopeful that it remains. We're always hopeful whenever we can get any language in any kind of act, whether it remains there or not or gets stricken out is another thing. But as we head to Washington to do some education later this month, if you will, the Restarts Act will be on our radar. Title IX, of course, will have some talking points. You and I had emailed earlier, right? It's back on the table. It's open for comments for the general public to feed into government and their representatives. So hopefully Title IX will remain solid is the goal. We have always leveraged Title IX at SWE in that language whenever we're educating on the Hill or anywhere. It is about equal access, right? Equal access to not only sports, but also education, which is super, super important.
Yeah. Any particular members that come to mind that have been active in this legislation?
So my favorite is a retiring Bernie Johnson from Texas. So she retired. And now I am totally blanking on the woman from Nevada that put the bill
Is she
forward.
the science? Is she also science and SST committee, science, space, and technology committee?
Possibly.
Let's see. Take a quick peek, folks. Let's see who's carrying the restart.
Cindy Hyde
Restart.
Smith.
All right. There we go.
Oh, Jackie Rosen is the key from Nevada, of course. How can I blank on Jackie Rosen's name? She's the primary, along with Cindy Hyde Smith of Mississippi, putting forward this act. But obviously, with everything going on in Nevada around reentry, Jackie is kind of the go-to, and her team, if you will, her staffers are very knowledgeable in this field.
Very cool.
But it's definitely right. It's focused on those small and medium-sized businesses, really to invest in them in offering, as we talked about, that mid-career returnships, right? And so really, really putting that front and center.
Yeah. This bipartisan legislation would provide funding to small and mid-sized STEM businesses, provide robust paid mid-career internships known as returns. Oh, well, this is from you guys. That's
is that our
yes. And then on Senator Cindy Hyde Smith's site as well. And her and Rosen reintroduced bipartisan STEM. So we'll see what happens. Well, fantastic. It's exciting to see that something is actually, potentially moving on this. And maybe by the way, when is your fly-in day? When are you guys on the Hill?
We are doing trainings on the 22nd, and then I think we're actually on the Hill the 23rd. That's when we'll be meeting with different staffers, just educating them about how SWE leverages, would like to see more folks leverage Title IX, also the Restarts Act. And we're still kind of working on some other legislation that we might want to educate on. Those are our two primaries heading into a couple weeks from now. I can't believe it. It's crazy. And I would be remiss if I didn't direct people to even the STEM Reentry Task Force page, right, which is reentry.swe.org. Check it out, learn more, sign up for our listserv as well, whether you're an employer or an individual who's interested.
That's fun. And they are going to have, we'll have links on the page here, and you'll have, opportunities to find out more, to connect. Go ahead and type in the chat in the comments, any questions, comments, observations, your own experiences. Jen will be able to take a look at those and respond. We'll be able to take a look and respond. And yeah, this is exciting stuff, and we're really glad to have you here, to have iRelaunch as part of this program, to have CBM Smith as part of this program, to have Untapped Potential as part of this program, to really have several voices saying, yes, this is possible. This is something that I think the associations could have a role here. That they could band together and create a joint class, because a lot of smaller utilities, they're not going to be able to do the whole thing themselves, but you could have a group come in, and then they could be placed at different utilities in different places that have that need, and then get the kind of cohort and mentorship and dealing with some of those other issues as a group, and even do it remotely. So
absolutely. And I think the desire is there. So if any of all of you are interested in starting something small, I'm here for it. Let's talk about it. Let's see where it can go. I mean, seriously.
Nice. Beautiful. Well, thank you so much, Jen. Greatly appreciate you being here. And for those of you here in the audience, greatly appreciate your being here. Come on back to all of the great interviews that we have here at the Women of Water Get Real Virtual Summit. And we will see you again soon. Thanks so much for joining us for this extraordinary conversation, one of 45 extraordinary conversations we had as part of the Women of Water Get Real Virtual Summit, where we explored where and why women are leaking from the water career pipeline, how we can stop those leaks, and even bring women back to water. I hope that you will enjoy all of these amazing interviews. If you don't have a chance to watch all of them during the summit, you have the opportunity to join us with a power pack and get lifetime access to all the videos, as well as an opportunity to join us for 30 days in a brand new community where we will dig even deeper in live facilitated conversations about some of the issues that are facing women in water. Look forward to seeing you there. Please join us at watercitizen.org/women, watercitizen.org/women for more information. See you again soon.